So, as per advertisements, the function of this workshop, presentation, event, whatever you want to call it, is to just kind of go over various options for incense, as well as how we've looked at it in not so much the history of the church, but in the tradition, in our current liturgical guides to a certain extent. And then to kind of play with it ourselves to get a sense of our own palates in relation to incense and what you can do with it. There, as the little flyer said, we have over 50 kinds of incense here. And Jacob and Bram were kind enough to spend several hours today dividing things up into little bags that you can take with you and try during the summer at your parishes. Or at your parishes on the weekend, whatever you care to get away with. And so we'll look at some of those and how they compare, as well as where they come from, who sells them, that kind of thing. Now, first of all, let's talk a little bit about how we use incense in the liturgy and where that comes from and all that. Of course, Father Leo could fill in where I fail, but I tried to be relatively thorough in these notes. So on page 4 forward, you see some scriptural citations for where incense is invoked. And guys, welcome. We have some notes that Scott will give to you there. We have scriptural notations for where incense is mentioned. Of course, in the tent of meeting tradition and then in the temple tradition, you actually have incense described. Take sweet spices, stacte, and onycha, and galbanum, sweet spices with pure frankincense, and then seasoned with salt, which I somehow have missed before. So we're going to try some salt today too and see what happens. And so take these things. Well, what are these things? Well, the stacte is kind of like what we'll call black styrax, and it's a wonderful thing. We'll take a look at it. Onycha is like some have described it as like part of a seashell that was found in the Sea of Galilee. It's not really clear what it is, from what I can tell, and so people just kind of ignore it. Galbanum, they're just other spices around. Of course, frankincense is pure frankincense. But what is that? So we'll look at that. And then sweet spices. Well, what's a sweet spice? So there are all these different categories. So as we continue through these, we know, because we refer to it in other places, the prayers rising like incense, golden bowls full of incense in Revelation. And then there's this mention in Chronicles well past the Pentateuch, where every morning and evening there's an incense of sweet spices. Sweet seems to come up a lot. Isn't that interesting? And then in Leviticus, there is this mentioning of 2 handfuls of incense beaten small. Well, how much? Who knows how much that is? Doesn't really matter. And you take coals and you burn the incense on that. And then there's this notion of within the veil, the Holy of Holies, or at least one of the levels of the temple, you should have incense, put it on the fire before the Lord, that the cloud of the incense may cover the mercy seat, which is upon the testimony, lest he die. So there's this notion of what is the smoke doing? We say in Revelation it carries our prayers, right? It represents or is our prayers before God. And then there's this notion of, well, being face to face with God would kill you in Old Testament understanding, and so the smoke is serving as another sort of veil in a way. We know the appearance of God in the Old Testament, the Shekinah, right, and theophanies, that God's voice is present, but there's this smoke, pillar of smoke over a mountain, all these kinds of things. And so smoke has an effect in that as well, that people are always trying to figure out how it applies presently, where we are part of the body of Christ, and we're pretty close to God in that respect. So how does face-to-face dying work? It's different, right? So you can ponder that on your own. But in our liturgical books, we have a few to reference. The general instruction of the Roman Missal, which is in there somewhere. Within those pages, we have this Holy Communion and worship of the Eucharist outside of Mass, what I lovingly refer to as the shag carpet book, not because it's shag carpet, but it looks like it's from the 70s, because it is. The ceremonial of bishops, and then sort of the source of some of those things, this documents of the liturgy, where there are notations from the council and discussions and all kinds of things, they all kind of say the same thing. The germ being the most updated version of that. And in the notes here, you can see there are 5 occasions where we can reasonably and I guess illicitly offer incense during Mass, which you can find on page 5 at the top. During the entrance procession at the beginning of Mass, to incense the cross and altar, at the procession before the gospel and the proclamation of the gospel itself, after the bread and chalice have been placed on the altar, to incense the offerings, the cross and the altar, as well as the priest and the people. Those are all together, it's not separate things. And then at the elevation of the host and the chalice after consecration. And of course, there are stipulations about Holy Thursday and all the rest of this. There are indications about how many times you swing, and we'll talk about some of that. There are a few other references in the germ about how incense can be used, but they're very similar to this. And then as you go to Holy Worship and of the Eucharist outside of Mass, Holy Communion worship of the Eucharist outside of Mass, it's really quite sparse in terms of what it tells you to do with the incense. But it does have some stipulations of, like, when you use a ciborium, you don't incense it. Or incense may be used in one case, or it just doesn't say in another case. What's interesting is that as you compare this Holy Communion and the worship of outside of Mass to the Loving Green Book, solemn exposition of, it's a long title, order of this for the solemn exposition of the Holy Eucharist, it kind of adds some comments to Holy Communion and worship of outside of Mass that aren't quite the same universally. So that's a great Father Leo discussion to have later in your formation. So there are things we can do. We know where it comes from. There are things we can do with incense. But one of the questions that always comes up is, well, people seem to not like incense in some cases because it appears to choke them, or they believe it chokes them or something. And some legitimately can. Some legitimately can because there are botanicals or certain almost paints and additives that are in there, wood shavings and things like that. They can easily cause you respiratory distress. But a lot of what causes respiratory distress is what's in the coals. So let's kind of talk through some coal situations. This is kind of on page 1 and 2 of your handout. There are about 7 types of coals, really, that I've been able to easily identify. And we have 6 of them here, and one of them is out in the fire pit, because that's where it belongs. Most of the coals that we work with, actually these are some from our sacristy upstairs, are these self-light charcoals. They have accelerants in them. Okay, so this is the major division of the two. Coals with accelerants. That means that if I take a coal, and let's see if I have any Dobby pans. I'll take one of these. If I take a coal and I light it with a match, what will happen is it'll start to kind of ignite on its own. It's already started kind of smoking, it's sparking. It has these waves of, we've all seen coals lit. That'll go on for, I don't know, anywhere from a minute to 3 minutes, trying to light itself. And depending on how much airflow there is, it'll be successful. But we all have perhaps swung the thurible as we wait for a coal to ash over. And depending on the size, the density, the amount of accelerant in the coal, that's going to change. But you can probably, even in the back, even with all the wind and stuff coming in now, you probably smell it a little bit. You know that smell, right? Well, when you walked in here, there were already 5 coals burning on this little burner over here. None of them have accelerants in them. Yep, that happens. None of them have accelerants in them. None of them spark because there's no gunpowder in them. And many of them are made with coconut shells, and the other is made with some hardwood. And though they take an external source to heat up that ideally is not a fire source, but just a heat source, they can burn just as long, if not longer, than the accelerant ones. And the nice thing about those kinds of coals, which a lot of which are made for hookahs, I mean, you're burning something constantly and inhaling things around it, so it's a good comparison. They really don't produce any smell by themselves. Those who are in here early might have had a little kind of burnt marshmallow smell. and that was from some of the coconut ones. That's the only scent they really have. They have low ash in most cases. The way coals are made, there's a low oxygen environment where your original material is heated up, and so the original material turns more and more just to carbon. And so the higher carbon count you have, the less smoke and the less ash you're going to have. You'll have enough ash, but not too much. And that's helpful, one, so that if you do swing your thurible, you don't have ash going everywhere. Not that happens a whole lot. And that there's just less smoke from the charcoal itself. Because sometimes people just identify with that smell negatively. This coal is still sparking. I'm going to give it a little treatment here while I talk. This little fan is a nice simulator for just breathing on it or moving your thurible back and forth. I think it's a little more efficient, if not absurd. I mean, there are other ways to position this, of course, but actually, just leaving it over this like it is right now, it's gotten ashier and more cooked through than it did in the moments before I started doing this. So it can get your coals to where they need to be very quickly without having to keep checking them or blowing on them and getting ash in your face and your eye, up your nose, wherever you tend to find you like ash. I'm gonna devote this table right here to the monitoring of this. Dan, maybe you would like to hold this over it. All right, let's do something special. Let's do this. So that's it. Sleight of hand magic is part of this now. So that's one kind of accelerant type coal, but there are ones that last for 90 minutes with giant things. There are some here. I'll just pass this around. These are from a company called Swift Light, and I generally think they're better than the scalloped ones that a lot of places use. They do light up faster by themselves. They're thicker, so they tend to last longer at a hotter temperature. But there are other ones. There are two main sizes of accelerant-based coal. One is the 40 millimeter size, which that one is, the one that we use here and lots of places. And it is nice because it has that contour on top where it'll keep the incense in place. Of course, depending on what kind of incense you use, it's going to stick to the coal immediately because it's hot, like your skin would. It's natural. And so that's a thing to take into account. There's also the 33 millimeter type, and we'll just pass this back around. And so it's a little smaller. You can fit more of them into a thurible, but because it's smaller and less dense, it'll burn up more quickly. So you could use those for, say, 30 minutes and know that they'll pretty much be dead by the end unless you tend to them regularly. Whereas you might be able to use something else and have it go for well over an hour.
You said the other one was 40 millimeters?
40 and 30, or 40 and 33, and they're little variations, but they're either a 30-something or a 40-something. And you can tell the size difference for sure. It smells like Dr. Pepper. Wow, there you go. And then you can get to sort of the absurd level. This is not something that any kind of church product company would sell. This is a Japanese kind of charcoal called Binchotan, which I've mispronounced, I'm sure. And it comes in a log about this size. The original form is like a shard of an oak tree, like lump charcoal would be, like you'd use on a barbecue. But you can take this and saw it down to be a kind of a charcoal-sized piece. It has a nice hole in the middle. And I have one of these sitting over on this burner. Well, I don't know, it was taken. Let's put it in here. It burns a long time, but it's really hot, and it doesn't produce really any smoke by itself, which is quite nice. You could use several of them together, or just kind of one abbreviated log if you were doing a procession. I wouldn't suggest that for anything but a procession because it's just so enormous. Where did the frankincense go? Yeah, that's the big ones. So we'll use this as a good moment to transition into different types of incense, resins, and other forms. So I'm going to take what's called a tier of, yes?
Just a quick question. Could you explain what you're doing over there? That's a non-flame, like a non-flame way to heat things up?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Luke, for asking a question. If there are any questions along the way, just stop me and I'll answer the questions. I'm more interested in answering your questions than I am blathering on, because a lot of what I'm saying is in the notes. This is, I think, most properly a hookah coal heater. It's basically a small stove, but it's raised up a lot from the table by these two layers here, and so on the bottom it's really quite cool, relatively speaking, for a heat source. And it has a removable top. You can, sorry that all of you can't see this, but I'll just slide them. We have these nice ashed over coals that are just hanging out. They're all ready to go. They're coals like would be in a thurible. The round ones that you may or may not be able to see are coconut, and the square ones are coconut. The round ones they're intended for hookah use, but you can certainly use them elsewhere, of course, as we're about to. So, by the way, this is one granule or one tier of incense that's sitting on a coal. You probably can't smell it that much because this really generic kind of frankincense doesn't have a whole lot of a smell, but if you're closer, you can smell it. So I'll just do this. I'll just pass this around. Clank as much as you like. Yes. We should have enough airflow to not be a problem. Next time. You can incense each other, I suppose. It's not blessed, so it's just smoke, right? But that kind of frankincense, it kind of has a nice middle area it produces a good amount of smoke. But it doesn't smell like anything really. Unless you have, say, a church full of it, you probably wouldn't have significant respiratory problems, except maybe from a cantor or someone who's inhaling vast amounts of air. Kenny, was that a question or was that? Okay. So as that, yes, Scott.
One question from earlier. So with all accelerant charcoals, what's like you have that kind of stove there? What are kind of the most practical ways you'd like get a good heat source for that in your sacristy at the parish? You know, if you wanted to use
This is $30.
Okay.
That's a great heat source. Lots of people have bought it, and very few. Has good recommendations on Amazon. So it's 4.5 stars, and thousands of people ordering it. And so I don't think it has a lot of electrical problems that anyone's described. But you can have a stone piece of metal, even something like this here. These grill mats that are insulated by each one up to 500 degrees, but as you add them together, that compounds. And so that's a very safe way to go. And as you can see, these are not putting off any smoke.
Yeah.
So the question is, what's above it? And your heat is dissipating really about right. I can start to feel heat here, 2 feet above it. As you get to 3, it's almost nothing, except maybe like me breathing. Right above it, well, yeah, my hand would cook after a few minutes.
Yeah.
But that's more from the coal itself, which can get up to 1,000 degrees, than it is the heater necessarily. But if you put your hand over a stove, it'll have the same effect. This is just a very small eye. It's like that. There are infrared versions of this that just use radiant heat based off of quartz. It's like a big room heater that's just compacted into a small piece. But I'm surprised. I'm surprised at how effective this is.
Yeah.
And how ineffective using one of these, even one of these, which gets up to several thousand degrees on one of these coals. It just blows all over the place.
Yeah.
Whereas these are
turn it on, like just walk in, kind of turn it on 10 minutes before,
right.
Let it do its thing, and then move it over.
Yeah, some of them, depending on how dense they are,
Yeah.
can take more than 10 minutes to get ashed over. But I think you could put in 5 and be fine for a mass.
Yeah.
It'd be more than 5 because I think 1 will last most of the time. It just depends, how big a thermal you have and how much incense you want to put on there. Like if you're in the basilica, we all know that they use a giant thurible with like 8 coals and they shovel on the incense. And we have some of the incense they use in the basilica here. But it's for a church that's the size of, say, our chapel, or even some that are size of the fifth floor chapel. We have some parishes in our diocese that are that small, or basically a room. That might kill some people eventually, especially old people. They might believe they're going into shock or something, and some might actually be. The incense that they use in the basilica is actually made by Holy Rood. And let's get into talking more about certain types, because this is a weird blend. But before we do, just another thing about...
Just to follow up on Kyle's question, I'm just thinking in a parish, like, how old would a person need to be to safely operate that? 'Cause I'm just thinking, like, young servers.
I think if a child can cook on their own stove at home, they should be able to. I wouldn't say someone who's just at the age of reason, but someone who is an adolescent should be able to do it just fine. As long as you have a protective environment, like a metal area, and it's not over a wooden cabinet, and they're not pyromaniacs, and any of these things. Yes, Luke.
So you said it could take more than 10 minutes. What would you say would be like the time you need to get it going before you started the mass?
20 minutes?
20 minutes, yeah.
So one of the reasons we might start charcoals, how is that one doing, by the way? Is it red? Is it ashed? What's going on?
Pretty ash.
Okay, great. We can turn the fan off. Let's put a little something on that while it's doing whatever it's doing. Let's do. Let's put something that we never would burn in the church. White sage. Go ahead.
Isn't that for exorcism?
No, not in our rates. So back to the coals briefly. There are bamboo coals. Japan has several. There are these little tiny guys. They're an inch long and a third of an inch thick, and there are a version of them that are squares. These aren't with accelerants, but they can light with just a match on one side and a good amount of air. They also produce no smoke, and they'll burn for at least 30 minutes. So it smells kind of nice, but just not something you'd want to burn in a church. It doesn't smell like church incense. It just smells like a kitchen because it's sage. Let me take that.
Deacon Tom, what's the like? How do you know what's church and what's not church? You
Oh.
can smell it.
I can give you a list. Yeah, I mean it's.
Is there a list?
We can go back. We can go back to Exodus, right? What's in the Exodus list?
Stinkweed. It's a little better.
You got your styraxy stuff. You've got your frankincense. You've got sweet spices. Is it sweet? No, throw it out. I mean, there are some things that are definitively not sweet, like myrrh. Myrrh. I just moved these, didn't I? Yes, they're over there. Myrrh is actually quite foul smelling, I think. It's unfortunate. Let's take a coconut charcoal. Father Leo likes coconut, and we're going to put this on.
Does it smell like coconut? 'Cause I think that's
Well, it may not anymore.
That's a pretty good idea.
No.
Let's move that mat over here.
Yes, yes.
It's not terribly hot at the moment. Myrrh by itself, I wouldn't really want to smell. But myrrh, when added to other things, is okay. It's like in any kind of dish that you're making. Use different spices and different ingredients to fill out the flavor profile. And myrrh is one of those where it's see that frown? It's a little bit of a sour note, and so it can cover over other unfortunate smells, and that's why you might use it in burial, right? Myrrh has been used in funeral rites and things for some time, but it's not a predominant smell you want in incense. So as you all start to smell the unfortunate nature of myrrh, let's modify it.
Wait. We have some sweetness right away, please.
We're going to have some sweetness right away. So when you keep smelling the myrrh, put a couple of those in.
Everyone can smell the myrrh before you put those on.
It was no.
It's not bad.
It's like a little sour.
Yeah, it's kind of sour, isn't it?
Definitely not pleasant. Medicine.
No, interesting.
Like an unfortunate medicine.
Well, did everyone smell the myrrh by itself?
You
Oh,
smell
I
it.
smell it from over
Yeah.
here. My stomach turned.
I have some tongs.
Yeah, it's it'd be hard to get on there.
Luke, you can operate upon it.
Worse than white sage.
You think so?
I thought the white
You can hit the burn off if you want. It'll keep burning if it's next to the coal.
Yeah, I think so too. Maybe because I didn't get a good mix.
We can also put another coal in there.
I don't think two will fit on it.
That's fine. Let's just put it right next to
It's a
it.
good photo. Do that again, please.
And you see the smell changes.
It already smells a lot better.
It already smells a lot better. Kenny can attest for all of us. Yeah. And so, and
Oh, that's way better.
Right? Yeah, they totally changed
Now my
it.
stomach is okay.
he crawled through the window.
Did you smell it?
What did you add to that?
I added something called Royal Green Hojari, which is the highest grade of frankincense, and it's only from Oman.
What do you mean?
What do you mean by highest grade? What does that mean?
So, as you can see on page 1 and 2, there are many sources of frankincense, all coming from the Boswellia, which I mispronounced, tree. There's Boswellia sacra, Pamphylia, something with a C, Carteria, or something like that. It's not, I guess you could just look at it. It's right here.
Yeah.
Cartery, Pamphylia, etc. And Boswellia sacra. The Boswellia sacra kind of grouping, which we have all the varieties up here today, are some variation of this smell. They smell sort of citrusy, sort of piney. It's sort of like eucalyptus, if you've ever encountered that. It's not a smell we encounter a whole lot here. You can actually chew it like gum. It won't kill you at that high grade. The frankincense we put in this durable is kind of like the middle grade. It may not be from Boswellia sacra tree because it's mixed in with a bunch of lower quality frankincense. So much like with the pressing of wine or other olives or whatever, they take the first sap off the tree and then whatever comes off later, and they take the big pieces that look like they're certain colors, green, red, yellow, whatever, and then kind of the weird mix of what's left over gets put into frankincense. And the pieces that are even smaller than that get put into what I can charitably call awful. It's almost like they're glued together, and they look like little skin tags on cereal. I mean, it's like it bubbled up somehow, and I don't know. It doesn't smell like much of anything. It doesn't burn well. It doesn't smoke well, and a lot of combined or blended frankincenses, especially ones that sound cool, have this crap in it. And it's most unfortunate. Luke, can I get you to add some of this? I'll come to you. If you go back to your seat. Lock it in right now. I'll put this guy in.
So this is the Japanese one?
No,
No?
we haven't burned any of the Japanese one.
You can tell I like this one.
Good.
What are these?
This is called Black Styrax.
Oh, so this is the Leviticus one?
Yeah, this is natural. And you can immediately start smelling that it's sweet.
Oh, wow.
It's vanilla. It's wonderful.
That's really nice.
I think this Black Styrax, I mean, clearly the Lord knew what he was doing. Yes, Andrew.
A follow-up question for myrrh. What do you feel? How do you feel about myrrh being used predominantly, say, for a funeral mass?
How do I feel about it?
Yes.
I don't think I'm qualified to really have much of an opinion.
Okay.
I think myrrh can be used in small quantities, but when you think of like, what does it make you feel? What's the evocation of the substance? You're not pleased.
Smells like talcum.
And you, before it's burned, it smells medicinal. So I I think with myrrh, if you're doing something like an All Souls Day, or as you say, in a funeral, it would, if someone is a constant churchgoer to your parish and you use incense differently for every season, or they would notice a difference. Like, oh, what's different going on here? Aha, something is different going on here. Or if you use it on, well, you wouldn't use it on Good Friday at all, because there's no incense on Good Friday. But some other occasion that's very solemn and evokes death somehow. But then again, you're in the Mass, and so there's a balance. So I think myrrh as an accent is fine, but not as the predominant element. Yes?
Okay, and just to sort of follow up on what I was asking earlier about the different grades.
Yeah, sorry, I never actually answered that.
That's okay, but well, you sort of did, but my curiosity was more of the, okay, so like the best grade is the higher sort of pressing, if you will,
Right.
of the sap. But what does that sort of translate into when it comes to the incense? Does it mean that it's sweeter? Does it burn better? What is it?
Yeah, I think all
the
those.
practical
I
effect
think
of
all
it?
those things. I
Okay.
think they're you'll get a more consistent. It's more about more consistent product.
Okay.
A lot of these things, especially the way they're marketed, they try to use bright colors. Some look like Fruity Pebbles. But no one's going to see the incense except the acolyte and the presider.
Right.
So what does it matter? It doesn't. And unfortunately, what some of those things have in them is additives, paints, whatever, coatings that will cause you problems, especially if you're chanting as you're incensing. It's not pleasant. So I think that the higher grades are more selective. They're more consistent within the batch, and they're purer. So I think they smell better for sure. So this, I'll get you a question in a second, Jack. I'm about to put some red hojari, which is just a step below green hojari. That's way too much.
How am I going to use this more?
Yeah, we can put some more on it, but
I just don't want it to smoke up.
okay, we'll take it out.
Also, it'll pollute the palate.
Well, yeah, it'll pollute the palate. That's
Just,
true.
just so we don't have another fire alarm.
The fire alarm's out there. As long as the door is closed, we'll be fine.
That'll be-
And the windows are open and all that stuff. So we'll be good. Yeah, so the fire alarm, what it took to light the fire alarm was this giant chunk being put in that giant thoroughbred with a pile of the tears that I put one of on here that smoked up the room initially. I would say I'd say 2 handfuls. To be perfectly accurate. 2 handfuls went on top of that thing, and it put off so much smoke within a short period of time that it got to the extinguisher. I mean the detector. So, you got to be careful. I think that it was a good experiment, had unfortunate consequences, but I think part of the value of that is that'd be great for a procession. You know, you want to put off a lot of smoke and you need it to last a long time, and that's a way to do that. So, thankfully, we've gained some knowledge, and now it's been imparted to you. Continuing with the types, yeah, there's with those types of frankincense, that's generally a category of natural resins. And I think the long and the short of any of the time we spend here, which is fleeting, is that you can't really go wrong with using natural resins over whatever weird kind of blend. If you know what's going into it, you can experiment with it individually. There's a section in the notes that says for respiratory considerations or something like that, and that's kind of where it mentions that. Using non-accelerant charcoal, using natural resins. You know, some of this frankincense stuff, it can be very expensive. The Royal Green Hojari that we just used, if you get it from Amazon from one particular vendor, it's $12 an ounce. Now, 1 ounce of natural resin will last you 15 scoops, so a mass. But are you willing to? Do you want to spend $12 on a mass for incense? And that's a great question, because in your notes there's a section on, I think it's called personal opinion or individual reflections, and there's some excerpts from Guardini's book, Sacred Signs, where he specifically notes, what is it? This is an entirely purposeless thing from a practical standpoint. We're burning something, it's in our way, we can't see through it, it costs a bunch, we have to have all this set up for it, you need a dedicated person or two to deal with it. It doesn't say all that, but I mean, this is what's behind those words in some way. There's a lot of manpower, there's a lot of resources. You could give that, as we know from the gospel, to the poor, who will always be with us. But the Lord is with us for a time, and in the Mass, that's a privileged time, where we can say, yeah, I want to use this gold thing, I want to use this other gold thing, I want to have beautiful music, and I want to have this great, sweet perfume that helps us understand our prayers rising to the Lord, helps us bless things, and reminds us that this is all mystery, and so it's not quite HD or 4K or 8K or whatever silly standard that's still less than your human eye that we think of as high quality, right? That's critical to this. What is it doing for that integrative worship experience that is itself sacramental, right? So all that has to be an undercurrent of what we're talking about. I mean, yes, this smells nice, or that smells nice, or I like how this smells, but what does that smell have to do with the liturgy that you're celebrating at that moment? And so you could say, well, you can use different incense combinations for different seasons. You know, how do you express solemnity? Well, yeah, you might have different music, you might have more candles, you might have a bigger thurible, you might do whatever, or a 4-chain versus a 1-chain thurible, whatever. You could do it in all those ways, but you can also have a sweeter smelling, more delightful incense than your bog standard frankincense. So these are things to think about. Okay. I've described a lot of things. What I'm doing here on the side, I haven't described it, in the notes about incense, you'll see that it indicates that incense starts smelling, having a smell, really right above 200 degrees. And I said earlier that the coals can get over 1,000 degrees. So what's in between? Well, they start smoking, in many cases, around 300 and maybe 300 to 330 degrees, a little bit. But as it gets hotter, it'll start to smoke more. And so, what now?
Oh, no, sorry.
Oh, okay. So like when I put the big coal in the thurible here, which is still hot from that, because it's a little ash there. It's still hot. It's still burning. If I tried to put something on it right now, it would eventually start smoking again. I think. Oh yeah, it's still pretty solid. I haven't had someone swinging it, but oh, there we go. This one little tier here has gotten up pretty quickly in temperature and is now smoking. But at first, when we put the myrrh on, that coal was pretty burnt out. It may have been maybe 500 degrees, and so it had to get more of itself warm, and then because there's a big chunk, other than just say powder, which can smoke up immediately. And that's another kind of section. It's another kind of section in here about what do you do with incense? Do you use these giant tier things? Please don't, unless you're using a procession, unless you're using one grain, because it's going to smoke up a lot. I can use this coffee grinder right here. And I basically have a powder. That powder is great for creating a lot of smoke initially. Do I have anything left in here? Yes. It's great for creating a lot of smoke, but it's not going to last. You know, a lot of liturgical actions are like a minute or less. And so that may not be a big deal. But some, like the gospel, proclamation, are a bit longer. Or if you're using option E, the incensation at the elevation, that's longer too, because you're there. And if your incense burns out, what are you doing? You're just swinging a thurible. There's no smoke coming out, and that seems a little crazy. So I can take this dust, and immediately smoke comes out, and a fair amount of smoke. But already that stuff is turning brown. Some has turned black, and it's a great cloud now, but it's not going to last as long as this one tier So having a combination of those things can be very good. So sometimes what I'll do, sometimes what I've done, is I've ground up something like the styrax that we see, or a little bit of this really generic frankincense, and coat other things, and it also starts to smell acrid very quickly.
Yeah.
So good for smoke, bad for Scott. But if you can kind of coat the other incense with the powder, you'll get smoke initially, and then you'll have a longer burning situation like this with a smell that isn't like that, which is good. Another way to kind of keep the two separated in terms of acridness of smell and unpleasant smell is to use things that go over your incense. I have these mica sheets in here, and there are larger versions of this as well. It's mica, and it insulates. Like, it's used in electronics. This bag is for circuit boards or something. So you can set this over a charcoal, and it reduces the temperature by virtue of insulation quite a bit. Another way to do that is if you don't have enough ash, you can get little bags of ash and just put it on top, and that helps insulate a little bit. So you either get longer burning, it's out, longer burning, or you get a better temperature. Not at 1,000 degrees, but maybe 700 degrees. Which brings us to, do you tap the coals? Well, what are you trying to do? If you want your incense to last less time, if you want the incense to potentially smell acrid, then yes, you tap your coals. But the best way for the incense to last longer is to just, and to have it be a better temperature most likely, is to just set the incense, to impose the incense directly on top of the ashed over coal. Now, if you have too much powder, that's completely coated the incense because it hasn't all burned up. If you have incense that bubbles up, and we have some over here, this monastery incense, it's unfortunate, in this particular one, it melts and creates like a tar pit that bubbles up. That will smother your incense and stop the airflow. Airflow. Smother the charcoal and stop the airflow. Airflow is critical for this. You have to have airflow. And so instead of breaking up a coal, keep swinging a third. Go off in a corner and blow on it. Whatever you need to get a fan. It's inexpensive. It's portable. It's great. I highly endorse it. So I think that these are all things, and those are all in your notes. Those are all in your notes. Okay, so we only have about 15 minutes left, but I want to give you all the opportunity to experiment with some things yourself. There really is so much variety here. It's almost hard to say where to start. The notes indicate the different types of incense that there are, botanicals and Greek incense chunks and all these different things. And we have bags that are labeled, but I think you should probably look at this like a consumer. What looks cool? Because that's how they're trying to sell it. And see if what looks cool smells good and smokes the way you think it should, et cetera, et cetera. There are a number of things here that have been divided into little bags, dime bags, and there are a number of others that are just kind of hanging out. Where's that Tupperware that? Oh, it's right there. Let me get some of those just started in the heater, so they'll heat up faster, and we'll distribute them. But before we kind of maybe break off into 4 different little groups, are there any questions that I haven't answered? Yes.
What do you think of the practice of putting like 2 typically self-light coals on top of each other for a mass, and then just putting something on top of that?
It's recommended by different coal manufacturers. I think even maybe this one. I don't know. I've read it somewhere on these little inserts the different coal manufacturers have that they say don't put another coal on top of one that's already there. Really helps for lighting it, for sure, but often in a thurible you can just set it to the side and do it that way. A part of it, and this is kind of the point of this burning off, which you can't smell too much because of our airflow, but this is burning off a smell right now and not smoking at all. It's very slowly burning. So as your thurible gets warm, this one's insulated by this inner bowl, but as the inside, I don't want to touch the inner bowl. Actually, I don't have to. So this coal right now is 836 degrees.
Wow. Okay.
the area right next to it is 215 degrees. But it's still 200 and some degrees. So if you get coal adjacent, like we did when we dropped a bunch of styrax in the one that was there, it'll still burn, it'll still smell. It's just not going to be as much smoke or deplete as intensely as if it's sitting on top of the charcoal. I mean, another method, if you just want to make sure you get your charcoal, you get your incense everywhere and you're indiscriminate about your scooping, or you have a weird spoon, or you have a shovel like a basilica, whatever, you can always break the coals up before, if they're the accelerant kind. I wouldn't really suggest this with the others because you would burn yourself. But to break them up and then put them in the bottom of the thurible so that all the surface area is covered by coal. They'll burn out faster, but if you've got a bunch of charcoal, you can go for it. So that way, no matter where the incense goes, it'll always be pretty hot. Maybe not 800 degrees hot, but still hot. The bottom of the thurible, incidentally, is 77 degrees. So, yeah, we went from 77 to 200 something to 800 within 2 inches. So, Vinny.
Since we're on the topic of thuribles, I'm just wondering what the differences are. Like you have 4 thuribles?
Yeah, I have 4 just for size and type differences. Thanks for asking. There are some notes about thurible usage, not thurible technique necessarily, but this is the single chain thurible. We have 2 of these in the house, and it's a nice big chain. Like it feels substantial. It's the fact that it's weighty by itself is great, as you read in the German, as Father Leo will emphasize, the church asks for 3 swings for the things that we usually incense during Mass: people, books, and the Lord, crosses, etc. And so, you see all kinds of people doing different things, like the ham fist method. Or sorry if anyone here does that. I didn't think that. Anyway. If you go back to like the books that Fortescue wrote, and I can pull it up if you want, but I think after our time, he even goes to the extent of saying, put the chain between these 2 fingers, hold the thurible X number of inches above the thurible, hold it at knee level. When you bring it up to the face, and then swing and bring it back, then take it down. Like, oh, okay, well that's a nice instruction list. It's still 1 swing. 1. So it's 2 clanks, but 1 swing. So there are all kinds of ways people have described this. If you read Bishop Peter Elliott's books, he'll describe something that's very similar to that, and some other things as well that maybe aren't in the German, but they're described. So in terms of thuribles, I dislike these strongly because you can't, at the end of Mass, unless you've properly separated the top of the thurible, you can't easily remove the lid, and then it has this like protrusion over the middle of the thurible. It's unpleasant. This thurible here has very wimpy chains, and they're not really balanced well. So when you take it, it doesn't feel like they're going to stay in place. So as you bring it up and bring it out, it spins all around. It can get intertwined, and these actually break really easily. This is a $50 thurible. It's stamped metal. It looks okay, but there are a lot of things that just don't quite line up. So there are all kinds of issues related to that. This is a nice good-sized thurible that I just got Ash all over the table with, and it has reasonable weight chains. It's got this odd kind of handle instead of a ring, so it's a little bit more difficult to, in a balanced way, raise it with 1 hand. But it's a good weight. You're not going to get tired if you just hold it by your side. The chain's a little long, so that's something you can change by just chopping off the chain and reattaching it. All of these have very long chains. But I think the 4-chain is great because you don't have to touch the lid. You have a chain, and the chain can do that. And I think if you think there's a value to the clanking, like if you don't have bells, for instance, and you want to have another sensory experience, that 4-chain concept makes it a bit louder. As you already heard when you passed this around the room, and as you felt it, it's heavy. Like it's weighty. I don't want to hold this for 30 minutes at a time. It's just too. You need to get out, Jackie?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
We're
There's that door too. Oh, the machine.
yes.
All right. margaritas and incense. Who wouldn't want that? This is weighty even here, and I realized as I was using it yesterday for a practicum, it had slipped several inches past where I wanted it to, without even me realizing it. And so when I went to go incense, like, it's too far. So, to get it and have it stay in the same place is a lot harder because of the weight. This is light compared to some thuribles that are solid brass. These are all stamped brass that might weigh 20 pounds. And you don't want to have a morning star, around your thing. It's just not necessary. It may be beautiful, but you'll break a poor child's arm as they're trying to use it. I think, why would you go much larger than that unless it's an egg? Actually, I've seen some people use. But that's, you could have a giant thurible that's one chain. So, part of it's the size of your church, right? Part of it is there a style that matches your other elements, candlesticks and things like that? You can pay thousands of dollars for a thurible. You can find a used one that's great. You could get, this is 150, I don't know what that is. And so you can get very, very reasonably priced thuribles that are okay. So does that help? And probably more words than you wanted. Okay. Any other? Yes, Luke.
Does the church have anything to say about incense used outside of mass, like for personal, like a priest, like holy hour, let's say, or I don't, you know what I mean?
Well,
like, or
Holy
even
Communion
in your
worship, that's
room,
all
like I've seen a priest, doing this in his, study,
Right.
and burning incense, whatever.
Well, Exodus has some pretty clear remarks about anyone who uses the blend of incense that's used in the temple is in a good shape. It doesn't use those words. It uses something a bit more extreme. We're not in the temple era. You're not blessing your incense that you're experimenting with. I had that scenario you just described. I've participated in that world. Oh, these are on. That's good. And I don't think the church has anything to say about it other than what Scripture says, which may not apply to today. So I don't know.
Thank you.
I don't think burning a smelly thing for like a scented is a scented candle. What if it's a scented candle made by monks with frankincense and myrrh? Like, boys, how do we evaluate that? So I think it's neutral.
You can burn white sage.
Yeah, well, that's a whole different thing with white sage. Yeah. Okay. Any other? Oh, you can start to smell this now that I moved it down on the candle. Anyone else have any questions before we have the opportunity to break apart in this past hour moment? Obviously, if there are any questions, ask them. Yes, Scott.
So just your main go-to is frankincense as the best type of kind of go-to.
Yeah, a proper frankincense. Weird, crusty frankincense like we passed around in the bag. Not great, but real tier frankincense. It looks natural. It looks like it came off a tree. That's the bad stuff. You can burn some right now. You can find out. I think it's bad compared to the alternative.
What's the alternative?
The alternative is some of what we've been burning up here, like the thick tier stuff, or the pebbles that are.
Is it thick tier?
It looks like it, doesn't it? But it's all kind of bubbly, right?
It's like going.
It doesn't look like the other frankincense. Frankincense from Ethiopia, frankincense from Oman.
Is that the one from Amazon? Or?
Yes, this is what you asked about the other day.
Yeah.
This has this looks natural. It's you can tell the difference when you compare them side by side for sure. No question. All right, so I'm going to distribute some coals, and then you all can come up to the table here and find whatever looks like a great cereal, or whatever you like.
You have dragon's blood.
We do have dragon's blood.
Oh, we gotta try dragon's blood.
I would church. I'm sorry, you had a question?
Check with Tom first. Tom.
Yes, 3 shirts. Yes.
Is this consumable? Is this the chewy kind?
I would. It's not ours.
Please do not consume that. No, don't do that.
If he does, document it.
I'm not
So
taking
we
a picture. He
can
did it on his own.
show it.
Dragon's blood. That's dragon's blood.
Well, come and see,
So yes, 3 swings. For.
I got it documented. Oh, okay.
That's the jar.
Yeah.
It's in the middle. So this is my call.
Yeah, it's good.
Oh yeah.
I'm smelling something. You use stuff that was like sweet tart. You know what I mean?
He said like the big tier, like that is like really good stuff. This is not as good.
It means something else, but it's
Like if you smell it, it's
oh yeah.
The coffer is here. Must be. He was talking about one earlier. He's like he's a lot of smoke tonight.
Any other questions? Just give a shout. And yeah, pair with a group and pick a table. I'm sure we can get 4 or 5 people around each table.
So how much is that kind of box?
That was like $30.
Yeah. Anyway, there's drinks.
So you can get a whole bunch of coals. Like this box is probably 20 and has 100% coal. I smell some myrrh somewhere. I put one each time I put it in. I didn't put one in the beginning, and I put it in one at the end, and we're comparing it to the palate.
I think you would.
So they go a long way.
But
This one smells really nice.
I mean, we just have a knife.
Oh, the rock and rose, yeah.
I doubt it's that.
Yeah, see if you get a metallic taste in your mouth when you smell it. Yeah.
Do you recommend like
The red hair is a little bit less quality than the green hair
I
dryer.
recommend you make your own
And then myrrh, I brought some myrrh because I thought myrrh would be good. And it's, I brought some
I mean,
myrrh.
are you the pastor? Unless you're the pastor, if you're the pastor, you might actually spend less over time if you do it that way. Some of these are. Yeah, you can, let me give you a tong, you can knock it off.
What else do you want to try? Because we have
I should have 4 tongs.
Sorry, we can take it off with a tong. Put it
Did I give you all a tong? You have 1 tong. Have another tong.
Okay, what do we want to
There are 2 more tables by the other door, so feel free to use those. They both have coals on them already.
So red hair dryer is the second tier of green. This is myrrh.
Oh, it's gone already? What do you want to? Oh, I took it off. What do you?
There's lots of stuff.
How about white one? White Hajari. Or is that a mix of stuff?
There's a white hood jar.
We bring the white station.
No.
Can we put some Moroccan rose with it? Probably we should take the white station for this one.
I mean, just use your
Good idea. So you can, yeah, I say.
You don't need very much.
Just if here's your.
Sure.
Maybe it's like
Maybe we can use one of these.
I think.
No, I think so. Okay, it's only like it's not an obsession.
Tom, which coal is this?
I'm sorry?
Which coal is it?
This is called Swift Light. It's an accelerant coal. It'll burn a while.
Is that your recommended accelerant one?
Yes, I think so.
It's kind of
I think it's a middle range, but it's nice and thick, so it'll go for a while. I don't think I recommend it. Self-light is what we use here. There's this one over here called Charcoal Master that is smaller, it's 33 millimeter one. Oh, the sandalwood. Yeah, I actually haven't tried that. I don't know what that's called.
And Three Kings makes an accelerant and a non-accelerant?
They do. The coconut ones that I tried with the powder, they were Three Kings. They're 33 millimeter. Yeah, a lot of the hookah specific ones are a lot less expensive than the ones from like Three Kings. Sure. Oh yeah. I tried to buy wholesale from Three Kings. They say they sell it, but they just don't respond. At least the Americans.
So, where's the Viking?
Three Kings stuff. We have a couple different. Oh, Three Kings charcoal.
I think this would be really nice.
This is the coconut.
You know what I mean? It's like very bright.
All 3 roses, what is it?
That's a
Or the Damascus rose.
Maybe you guys can use these.
I don't
as-
have any of the accelerants type of
for yeah, so that way this can stay in the middle, but that can be passed through.
That's the rose.
You should go over there.
There are some rose scents that sells rose scent.
Do you guys want to experience some myrrh?
These things are very good. These little Japanese ones.
Well, I'm actually
Because there's
curious
really
about that
no scent.
because I
Heat up
think the
without-
sweetness of the rose is going to
But they're
actually
definitely
really
expensive. I think
dampen
1 or 2 boxes of this.
the strength of the myrrh.
Yeah, me
That's
not gonna last.
Sandalwood or something in here, right?
y'all want some sandalwood?
You might use 2
Yes.
or 3 for
Is it?
I would say, well, it's all Japanese. I would say 20.
I have an idea, let's turn this over.
But good to know.
Oh, this is
So
this is
the
a problem.
color,
Right?
right?
This is a big,
We just added some myrrh to see
Yeah,
if that
that's
gives it a darker.
It's
In concept, I don't like that.
Yeah,
Oh, I
it totally.
ones they always
Oh, that's pontifical by Three
Smell a
Kings.
little bit
Yeah.
more of the
It
dark.
smells okay at first, and then you're right up close next to it.
right. Well, that was the thing is I was always right up close next to it. Yeah, and I hated it. It's just
Oh, yeah.
Sweet and somber.
they were gonna know cold.
Yeah, or just do it somehow. I'll bring it over to you.
Yeah, it's odd.
Actually,
Sarah's well with white coats.
there's
Yeah.
a lot of theology.
Smell it.
Right behind you. There you go.
Do you guys want to try to just throw this one on or take some stuff
Do you have an
off?
extra coal?
Yeah, I'll bring it over to you.
Oh, thank you.
I kind of want to see what the sandalwood smell like by itself.
By itself?
If we can get.
How about a
botanical?
okay, botanical what?
Oh, wow. Oh.
Honeysuckle,
black-
lavender, gardenia,
the black
whatever.
one kind of-
Any of those?
the sandal.
Yeah, sandalwood.
It's like a, I guess, yeah.
It's really,
That would be a question for Dean or Tom. Which one?
It kind of feels like you're trying to pick up a brownie. Oh my gosh, all these are like one. I guess it makes sense.
Do you see it in there anywhere?
I'm looking.
I wrote it down because I didn't see
It says rose, this is Damascus rose.
So, yeah,
That-
maybe it's-
that counts
This one is.
as a botanical, so this would be a botanical.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That is. I know what gardenia smells like, and lavender, and honeysuckle. Okay.
Oh, whoa. There's a whole series of smells that just walk through. Need another coal or you good with your cone?
Oh, we'll take another one. Why not?
Yeah, maybe it'll burn, blow on a little bit.
Go for it.
Give it a smell.
I can definitely smell the sandalwood.
Is the door closing? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyone who wants to try the Palo Santo or the sandalwood, there's a little white box somewhere with sandalwood in it. I would love to know what that smells like.
Oh, that'll be good.
I got a lot in my nose, I'm
Tom, do
sorry.
you have an extra coal?
Tom,
Yeah, I'm going to get another one for you now. Yeah,
this is sandalwood
That
burn.
was sandalwood.
but that's a cone. That's a powder.
Oh.
There's actually sandalwood. Some people out
Question.
I'm so curious.
Well, the rose one is already done. Was a botanical. Some of these over here.
Ketchup?
Affirmation
I know.
There's a gardenia, a rose, a queen of heaven, and they're all a Nile temple. They all have botanical.
I mean, I think it's smell.
Sure, pleased to provide it.
Yes.
So I think I'm on the service of the church.
There's a lot going on.
And the notes, the smell.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, you can see it.
I bet it's covered in powder.
Good luck.
I think there's too many.
Oh man, good luck. Which parish or which pastor?
Related wayside?
Oh, that's like milk and candy.
Tom, did you say Swift Light or South Light?
Swift light.
This smells
Self-light is the
like
stuff we have right now.
sour candy, I think. So I kind of want to see what it is.
Sour candy.
I think it might be nice, like adding on to something else.
Do you mind if I do this?
Oh, the cassia. That's
That's their sweet.
Kesha.
This is fake
the cassia. Okay, great.
Tom had this
Gotcha.
at my parish.
Some people have had weird reactions to it, but I like it as an additive.
I like the Damascus rose the best so far.
Yeah, it goes along, like a little bit goes a long way. And I tend to grind that up and put that with other stuff so that it's not way intense smell.
So that's just cashew. I can. It almost gives it like a lemony, like acidic, kind of like bright. And by itself.
Just like with the birds.
Right.
now they're both smoking.
Yeah. So definitely.
Yeah.
Tom is inspired. Like, I want to create, like, as a, if I were doing a priest one day, I'd want to have like a funeral mass, like wedding mass, and then like preliminary mass.
Yeah.
Instead of like 3 blends that I just like made myself.
Pretty great incense blend for parish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It smells cinnamony and like Christmassy.
It smells wonderful.
And look, we already got some
Recycle this.
Yeah.
You can just have deacon
This
top
is
all the
awesome.
time.
I've had so much fun.
So it actually has stuff
Like,
Well, take your time recording it too, so.
You guys learn what's
so much
good.
I had to.
Damascus Rose. This is very good.
Three Kings Gift is good.
I like
Let's take one of those on your, over there.
Do you have the Moroccan rose?
No, let's try
Very
that.
nice.
So,
I don't. Okay, we're gonna do a swap. They're gonna get the Moroccan rose. We're gonna get Damascus rose.
Like that, I can really tell it difference. For most other things, it's just like, this is a nice smell.
Am I rocking around the Christmas tree?
Can I take the sandalwood off? It's like really awesome. Or do you guys like it?
Smoke that goes away all
And
day.
that's interesting, just to know that it makes a lot of sense.
This smells good.
Smells forest.
Like that. Like that, like that's sticky, man. No, like, yeah, like.
That's true.
No, like this, it's fine, but
I don't see it.
Yeah, I smell that too. Like it's almost like I put some on the couch and stuff. Like Lysol to me.
What now?
Do cool, please.
New cool. All right.
Oh, sweet.
Deacon Tom, could we pay you a stipend one day in the parish and have you come over?
I don't think I'm an expert yet, so I don't think I can charge you for it. But, you
In
know,
like 10 years, you might.
Go on.
yeah, another few years.
This seems like a great thing to be in a parish that people know.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, most people don't need to know, do they?
Well, I was saying to the group that like it would be nice if you have a group of parishioners that vote on like which one you
I
use.
gave you a bad. Tom, sorry, it's on question.
All right, let's try
You guys
this.
think it's
Rock and Rose. Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.
So what's the white powder that's on
It's
There
it's
we go.
very fine.
Boom.
So it doesn't stick together. It's not cocaine.
Okay.
Interesting.
The white powder
It's
is just a
similar.
fine clay.
It's just a
And then the Damascus.
It's a Damascus. Yeah.
What's the fine powder from?
I like the Moroccan rose. I like Moroccan
It's a
rose
fine-
better than
yeah.
Damascus rose.
Rocking around.
Oh, that's Moroccan. I like Damascus.
Damascus rose and Moroccan rose are probably the same original manufacturer. It's sold by 2 different companies.
Oh, yeah.
They're the same, you said?
I think they might be.
Which way?
I thought so too. It's funny, I got some Styrax, black Styrax from one company, and it was full of like earth stuff.
Like it's bubbling.
And so a friend of mine washed it off with alcohol and let it dry and everything. And then it smelled just like the good kind we have here.
Yeah.
Hey, Tom. What company makes that?
I'm with Paul Leo on this.
That's
Wheaton Religious. Yeah, they just sell samples. I think
We've all
it's
passed the
Church Supply
COVID
Warehouse.
test today. Can you
But this is the same as Moroccan rose.
Yeah, by the way.
And
We
that's
have
from
Moroccan rose here. It smells a little
Well,
different.
careful, because you might
Yeah.
want to send you.
All right.
I mean, I think it does, but.
That may have been
Yeah, I
combined
think
with
I want
something
to add
else.
some black Styrax. That I really like.
Right here.
You guys like the wood one? Yeah, so we've done
We
like
did the sandalwood,
myrrh
which
and
There's another one.
cassia and the rose and the black Styrax.
The blend that I really like is green, red, Ojara, plus a little bit of cassia, black Styrax, some of the boilerplate frankincense, and a little bit of
He has a
the
saw over there.
rose. I've used that for Christmas.
that one, is that the one that the pastor and deacon couldn't stand?
Well, that was, I don't know what happened with that, because that was the
Oh,
same
yes,
formula. I don't know, I just don't know what
Yeah.
happened. But yes, it would have been the same base, but they said it was something with the cassia. But I don't know, maybe someone had an allergic reaction or something, but it's.
What about the stuff from Holy Root?
Ooh, I know.
Oh, yeah, we haven't done anything with that. I said we would, we didn't.
Oh, is that the base?
I
use your saw, Tom, just to break off a little piece of this.
Oh, sure. Go for it. There's a cutting board right there. Here we go. So this is what we have upstairs, that we've used occasionally, and the basilica uses. I think the basilica always uses this. Notice all the roots? Like, what do they do? But you can try those both.
Good thing or bad?
I mean, I think any part of wood in the incense is a bad thing.
Yeah.
We can put it in the
Or I am hungry. and-
coffee grinder if you want.
Yeah.
What's this?
That's
hilarious.
It's just burning.
Oh,
It's not
that's
picking
bad.
up smoke. It's just not getting that hot.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's see what temperature. it is.
Andrew has a brilliant
I don't like
idea
what's
to
going on.
make your mask smell good.
I do this all the time.
I think I moved it up.
Are you serious? Like the kids, the ultra,
Yeah, I mean, this is yeah, you can get little stands.
Oh,
You can use this. Like in my room, what I do now is I just take one of these and
So
stick
this
it
is
up
all Holy Root.
and turn it up to like one
This
and a
looks
half or
very
2
strange.
Is it sawdust? Or is this powder?
What is it called?
Jerusalem sampler.
It's
I think
it's
I used to, oh, this is the loud out thing?
Sawdust.
I think that's
I
sawdust
like it.
and frankincense.
That'll make you interesting.
Oh,
Does anyone need another coal?
That's what
I don't like it.
What is this?
What's like the best stuff you think we have?
Royal Green Hojari is the best. Royal Green Hojari plus Black Styrax equals lemon drop.
Smells like it's
So,
kebab.
Tom, with
Hey,
this
Tom.
stuff, how do you know how much to use?
I would use a spoon. I think I have a boat spoon somewhere.
Ooh,
Oh, it's on this table. Did anyone see a
That's
spoon
so
on that
brown.
table over there?
Palo Santo smells like kebab.
That one's
Oh.
nice, we used
Probably
that,
like almost
we
like
used that at JP too.
Put it with myrrh. Maybe it'd be
You know,
great.
it's
You can tell.
smelling everything. So the cat
Oh,
versus
great.
Myrrh versus Styrax versus
I wouldn't put more than that.
Oh, right.
Or the frankincense.
All right, here's another coal if we have a. Oh, is that, something just smells like a vine burning, like a weed.
That's this.
That's
Okay, no one used Palo Santo ever.
Yeah.
That's a wood. That's a wood.
That smells good.
Right.
It smells like a barbecue. I like Holy Root.
I see. I mean, one of the nice things about doing this in groups is you see how different people are taking the smells in.
Yeah, well, it's so good.
But now how do you spell that separately
What do
from
we
the
get smell
royal?
out here?
Look forward to burning incense.
Yes.
I think it's better not to smell
Alright.
too close to the
This
charcoal.
one's called Middle East Love.
Yeah, smell it away from it.
Anybody try Middle East love?
Is that what you just put on?
No, I put the amount after.
Nobody's used this
I
yet.
don't like that one.
There's so much. We probably can't get through them all.
Ooh, I don't like that. It smells a bit better.
When it fills up a church,
Not
it's actually
associated.
quite nice.
I still.
What's in the
Oh, someone should try the monastery incense. I think it's in the mortar and pestle right now, or the mortar or the pestle. Maybe in migraine. Where did it go, David? Is it in bags?
Okay, I want to try this root thing.
The-
Smells
oh,
good.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, you guys are smoking it up over there.
Yeah.
I'm
Oh,
not getting citrusy notes here, but this is gonna make it.
Okay, who's
citrusy.
brave? Who wants to see incense bubble?
I'm so brave. I'm the bravest.
As long as it doesn't.
So we're burning the
Flip over that
laudate,
coal.
Okay.
and now we're adding the other.
So I think
that's
the-
okay.
The laudate one is supposed to be a spicy citrus.
It smells spicy, citrusy.
You bubble.
So why is it bad?
I think
about
Jacob
that?
described it earlier
Because
as
stops the airflow.
too peppery.
Yeah.
Creates a tar.
I don't know.
Too peppery. That's a good description.
Oh, okay. You got
That's
it.
how I feel.
Yeah.
Now this interesting combination, which we used I think a few weeks in the chapel, is a combination of the basic frankincense, laudate, black styrax, and maybe I don't know other fragments of things.
Sure.
So you should try that.
I thought that was nice.
Yeah.
Oh, I like the smell.
I know what it is.
Yeah.
And it's like straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, like, I know what it is, it's not gonna,
That's really nice.
although I think that, I can't remember if
This?
this is one of the other ones we
So-
used.
This is what we use in the chapel right now.
This stuff
Three
and
kings.
monastery.
Three kings.
Yeah. Maybe because it's active.
It's Holy Root plus the
That's
plus
a weird
like
Well, this is Holy Root.
it's the roots stuff plus
Oh.
Holy Root.
Alright.
Put the ban on
We're
it.
gonna do Middle East Love.
I like it.
You gotta wait for this to stop.
I like it a lot. Yeah.
It really like burned my nose though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Any kind of plant pieces are gonna
Maybe
have
I
that
should
effect.
ever go try to fix.
See, same thing with them. Okay, so plant ones
I don't think it
burn your nose more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which ones do?
That's good to know. Yeah.
Just kind of plant.
But of course, like, I mean,
Rather than like
The
sap.
resin.
Okay.
Yeah, like
No,
like
they're
all
gonna
the
smell
ones
the-
that we've had.
the
it's
resin.
just diffused. Like,
Oh, yeah. Only
it's
you
still
will
like
have
you
to
Well,
sit
the,
with
bot-
this
the
and you
botanicals will
realize-
hang around a long time
Oh.
elsewhere in the church, right? But right up close, you'll choke if you're trying to speak or say anything.
It's like,
And that's what I think is great about this laudate, is it hangs in the church.
Okay, so this root stuff, right
Well, it is
here,
up close.
No, no, but I'm saying
for the people.
Yeah, for the people. It's
like
especially in the facility.
closer
They're really
look.
good.
You want some, really good observation.
But the road stuff is good like that too.
Well, the thing is, as if you're a thorougher,
Yeah.
this would be really painful.
Oh wait, sorry.
Yeah.
That would also be really important not to have anywhere near a
So,
wire
there you
or.
Yeah.
Oh no,
Yeah.
yeah. As Gabe discovered yesterday, with the most basic frankincense.
This is the
Can
root
I make a mix of
it's
the,
not-
of that one?
Make whatever mix you want.
Oh, we can make a mix.
Yeah, you can. We got a mortar and pestle.
What is the,
So we'll use this in the point.
what type of incense is the holy root?
It was actually the Holy Root here.
Oh, the whole root.
It has
So
wood.
it's not. This one smells really nice.
So
Yeah,
the
that's what we use at
Cantica
JP
has
too. Yeah,
wood,
yeah, latte.
and the other has I think like wood shape.
Maybe
It's kind of wet.
Right.
Yeah.
It always
Dog
looks like
taste.
Yeah, it does. I wouldn't use that ever. So,
Yeah.
How much is the ounce you said?
that little packet right there
Yeah.
is $12.
Oh, not too bad. Because for like the, that's
Yeah, yeah.
Where do we get bags
Yeah,
here?
those are
Yeah.
big bags or little bags elsewhere, but we have plenty of big bags.
Thomas is like doing
Yeah,
all
there's-
that sharp.
No.
I like that
YouTube
one.
too.
Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
the big package of resin.
Well, it's from Japan. It's like coconut and it's like really good.
Half a pound.
Really?
Was something like,
Thank you, Deacon Tom.
you're welcome. It was something like, maybe $40. And that's a pretty good.
Did you know the green?
Yeah, that's the green.
Majority would?
Yeah, the green.
Do you still want to take pictures today?
I don't know. There's the really good green and the, who asked about it?
Oh,
Luke?
yeah. Well, I think Luke was asking
That
about
might
it.
be better next week.
Okay,
Sorry, the
it's
green
really
one,
good
Jar?
green.
Also,
So
we
that's
get
the
a little,
really
The greenest of the green.
a little green action. So I want to do the green red mix, like you said.
What is this? Oh, this is the direct package.
Yeah, this is.
This is the $18 ounce.
Oh, it's pretty.
This, I mean, it's just green. You
Yeah,
can
I
see
don't
this is like, no, no, the smell about this.
Over the summer.
That's just more
I
select.
kind of want to burn incense now. Smell like it on its own.
Me too.
It's crazy. It is too much.
Hey, if you didn't have a thurible, what would you use for it?
So there's this setup over here.
I know that's what
pretty
I have.
inexpensive. There's also a little stand that just holds one of these things. It's called a I had one, I have an extra one.
Are there any
You can use that. Just take this and stick it on there. I get the smells of it just by doing like 1.5 to 2 on that burner.
Okay.
And it works really well to not produce any smoke, but still kind of smell like it.
I like the no smoke.
Yeah, so this around like, fine, you can use a candle, you can use a candle.
Yeah, there are.
A little stand.
So, Tom, again, so what has like good smoke production, but like the ever so gentlest smell? You're still going with that.
Still going with it.
Is that frankincense?
That's right. It's the least expensive, best way to accomplish what you used to say. There are better quality frankincenses that you spend a lot more for them, and it is about the same thing.
This one?
Yeah, as long as you have
Is there
some
better
powder.
quality? In what sense? Like what? How would you experience the better quality?
Better smell.
Better smell.
So it wouldn't be an offensive smell, it would just be a more complex or maybe sweeter smell.
But not overwhelming.
Well, I think overwhelming.
So what would that be?
Any of those superior Ojari.
Smell is around.
What was
Yeah,
that?
you can take the red, the green,
Yeah.
But it smells worse than, I used to like this one a lot, but.
So in the back,
I wanna take a few dimes.
those black peppers. Hey, what'd you say?
This is the. I like the
Tier
rose one.
one.
Yeah, the middle.
This is the mass
middle
grade.
grade.
Oh yeah.
Tier of frankincense.
I like the rose.
I used to really like this one, but it smells different than how I remember it.
What are you trying?
What, latte?
Oh. Yeah, I mean, it's possible since it's all natural stuff, in theory, there could be differences between batches. Just like with vintages of wine.
Can we take a few of these?
Yeah, they're put in bags so you can take them.
Oh, I can just take this bag.
Yeah, just take
Oh,
them.
okay. Cool. I like this one. It smells like my rosary. I have a rosary.
Oh, cool. Oh, wow. That's nice.
One time I saw a holy icon of a coach. Oh, okay. Like oil dripping.